All right, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes to let people kind of filter in. Welcome to Built by Us, how nonprofits can lead the charge in local development. We're really excited to be speaking with you all today. Interested in hearing what you have to say to us as well. Just give it another minute as people file in. All right, we have got a lot to cover today, so I am going to go ahead and get started as people continue to join us. So welcome everyone to this webinar. We're really excited to be with you here today. Before we get started into the content, I just wanted to introduce myself and our panelists and the organizations hosting this webinar today. So my name is Claire West, and I'm the Senior Program Manager at the Center for Creative Land Recycling. For those of you who don't know us, we are US EPA's Technical Assistance to Brownfields provider for EPA Regions 9 and 10, and have been the TAB provider for over 15 years in those regions. So what do we do? In that role, we provide trainings and resources, support practitioners with redevelopment planning, grant prep, review, remediation support, stakeholder engagement, project visioning, and more. We are also sharing the hosting responsibilities of this webinar with Groundwork USA, our close colleagues. If you want to go to the next slide, Kate. So we are also sharing this webinar with Groundwork USA. Groundwork USA is a national nonprofit that supports and strengthens grassroots efforts to build healthier, more resilient neighborhoods. Notably, SeaClear and Groundwork USA have a partnership to support nonprofits nationally as they navigate the land reuse and redevelopment process. So that's really the nexus for this webinar here today. And I encourage you to get in touch with us if you go to the next slide, Kate, so you can learn more about our services. You can schedule a technical assistance call if you'd like to have a one-on-one conversation, get to know us better, learn about what we can do for you. And then if there's one thing that you do, I think this is probably the most important thing, it's to subscribe to our newsletter so that you can stay up to date on trending land reuse topics, upcoming events like this webinar and other in-person events, and inspiring case studies of land reuse projects all over the country. So with that, I don't want to delay our content any further. So I want to introduce Kate Greene and Lori McKinney, who will be our main presenters for our webinar today. And yeah, I'm just going to let them take it from here. Welcome, Kate and Lori.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Claire. Welcome, everyone. We are so glad that you're here today. I have been really looking forward to today to talk with you about something that is deeply personal to me and actually really powerful in the economic and community development landscape. We are going to talk today about how organizations like yours can take the lead on development in your communities. In the economic development world, I think we give a lot of time and energy away trying to attract outside developers to our communities. We're trying to convince them that they should choose our town, this project, this opportunity. And I always think, what if we didn't have to do that? What if instead of doing that, we could use that time and energy to lead and own these projects that we know will be successful and transformative in our towns? So that's what we're going to talk about today, about how nonprofit organizations can step into that developer role and be that leader who, kickstarts development and creates the spaces that, make your town cooler and stronger, projects that can, build and retain local wealth. And maybe even diversify the revenue streams for your organization so you become a little bit more resilient. So my name is Kate Greene, and I am the redevelopment director at Atlas Community Studios. We work predominantly in small towns and rural places across the country, and we consider ourselves to be a project support team. So we try to plug in and kind of be extra hands and capacity to people and places where they need it. I have a background in community economic development, specifically through work in the world of downtown revitalization, brownfield redevelopment, and project finance. But as of late, I'm kind of digging more into local wealth building strategies and how we can use those to build stronger places. So Lori, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Kate. And I'm a creative who moved back to my hometown and founded a arts-based nonprofit. And then we really believe in music and creativity to transform places. So we've been using a variety of public art and events and media production, neighborhood building to reimagine a downtown that was previously abandoned. 20 years later, it's flourishing with life with cafes and galleries and a transformation that a lot of people thought wasn't possible. And I was fortunate to meet Kate in the community development world over a decade ago. I'm pretty sure it was about 15 years ago that our paths intersected, and I'm grateful to be able to work with her in a variety of ways. Thanks for having me, Kate.
Thanks, Lori. All right, so before we get started, I thought we would talk through kind of the goals for the day. First, and I think this is probably the most important piece, is that we just want to reframe what it means to be a developer. I think for a very long time, developer has felt kind of like this role that's reserved for certain people with money, with special skills or degrees, and with like more money. And we want to challenge that narrative today. We're going to walk through the development process, not in a super technical way, but in a way that kind of helps you understand exactly what's involved so that you can figure out where and how you can plug in. Also along the way, we're going to have some conversations and share some examples of what we've done, what I've done, what Lori's done, and some other folks, and then how and why we decided to do the thing that we did. And then finally, I think we hope that you walk away from today with the confidence to do the thing, right? To take whatever that calculated risk might be, and with some clarity on the next best step to do that. So whether it's to go it alone, to buddy up with somebody to get it done, or bring those extra hands on board so that you can learn as you go. So I wanted to preface this, I mentioned that local wealth building, local ownership is really important to me. And this is really the why behind this conversation for me. It's why I said that it was really personal. And it's because I believe that we are in the practice of giving too much away, particularly in kind of small rural places. I think that in general, we kind of default to the idea that somebody else from somewhere else will come in and save us, or maybe they need to come in and save us. And sometimes we do need that help, and that's okay. But I think that when those outside forces come in, sometimes what they bring to the community is a big surprise, and sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. And regardless, I think a big part of the wealth that's generated through those investments, that wealth leaves our town. So when local people do that, when it's residents and business owners and nonprofits, when it's local folks who own what is being built or being redeveloped, they have more control over it. They have control over how it's used and who it benefits. And that doesn't mean that every local actor is going to be, a good guy or do kind of what's best for the community. But it does mean, I think, at a minimum, that the financial returns from that project are more likely to stay local. And that's good for all of us. I think another benefit of having kind of that local ownership is that we see kind of stronger feelings of pride in our community, and there's kind of a more sustained investment in the property. We don't have any of that absentee challenge so much. And then we also kind of grow community advocates when local ownership is involved. And so again, this is not an argument against outside investment. Outside partners are important, they're valuable, and they play an important role in how we grow our local economies. I just don't think that they should always be the starting point, and I think too often that they are. And so, kind of leaning back into those goals of today, I just want us to walk away knowing that we can be our own solution when we need to be. And we want to make sure that you kind of have an entry point and the tools to do that. So before we become local owners or developers. I think, we have these ideas about what it means to do that, what it involves to do that. And those are the things that kind of hold us back. And so I kind of wanted to kick us off really with a quick conversation, Lori, with you. You are new to the development scene. As you mentioned, you're an arts and culture nonprofit, and you've been doing some meaningful stuff, some really transformative stuff. But until very recently, it hasn't been about redeveloping a building. So I wonder if you could talk just, kind of briefly about maybe going into this, what you thought your role would be when you had this idea, when it came to mind. What role did you think you would play? And then like maybe what were the fears or kind of preconceptions that kept you from thinking that you could be the developer?
Mm. So I'm typically a convener and an orchestrator of events or media programs. And the opportunity that sort of spawned this whole project was a collection. It's actually my husband's grandfather preserved a chapter of our nation's history in a warehouse. So it has steam engines and antique automobiles and classic antique toys. It's this remarkable collection. So that was sort of like the seed of this project. And, I was going to a lot of different conferences and gatherings, and the pieces all just started to fall into place, like opportunities that presented themselves. But I never imagined us sitting in the developer seat. Like you said, I'd always thought about outside developers or attracting people who could do the process. But for this particular project, we imagined that the city would hold the project. The original idea was for the city to operate this museum the same way that they operated a public library or our existing railroad museum. And I just imagined that, a bigger, more experienced, long-standing, entity would be the holder of the project. And that's where we were at before everything changed.
Yeah, but before everything changed. And those are the fears, right? Those are the things. It goes back to that myth. It can't possibly be me. They do these magical things that, it can't be us. And I love the way that you frame the work that you do as a convener, because as we will talk about later, that is one of the most critical roles that a developer will play. But it's probably one of the ones that we never think of, or one of the ones that we don't talk about the most. So anyway, I love that you framed it that way, because you've already, in my mind, kind of highlighted some of the strengths that you have as a nonprofit and as a person that make you a natural fit for this. So thank you for sharing that. Kind of similar to Lori, so I also was a nonprofit director many moons ago, and I also assumed that it was up to somebody else to redevelop our downtown. I was the director of a Main Street organization, and I spent a ton of time kind of wooing developers, hosting big events, and kind of trying to put on our best show and be the best version of ourselves, and like kind of figuring out what incentives we could offer that would like sweeten the deal and make them choose us instead of like maybe the town next to us that is a little cooler or whatever. But kind of the story was always the same. Our community was a little too disinvested. Certainly the neighborhood was disinvested. The market was too soft. There weren't similar projects that were happening to kind of prove the concept or the investment. So traditional lenders were just, they weren't down, right? The developers were interested enough to come and kind of hear what we were talking about and listen to our story, but they were definitely not convinced. And so, one day I kind of was like, I think the best way to show people that our downtown is worth investing in is that we just need to do it ourselves. Like we need to put our money where our mouth is. We're an organization about restoring and revitalizing our community. So let's do the thing. And we did. And I had no idea what I was doing. I think I actually kind of probably had some dangerous but effective combination of like, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good, along with kind of this inherent belief that nonprofits are uniquely positioned to take these kinds of risks and to do this kind of work. And it paid off. And we found a way to buy the worst building in downtown, and we fixed it up. It became a mixed-use project. We had apartments upstairs, we had a yoga studio, and interestingly, a U.S. Senator's office on the main street. We pulled together well, just a million funding sources, and way too much debt service, which would not happen today. Knowing what I know now, I would have done this differently, but we did it, and it worked. And that project was actually the catalyst for the redevelopment of at least 6 downtown buildings. And I know that because the developers of those buildings, who were all local, and most of them were first-time developers, actually came to us and credited this project, saying, this work and seeing us do this work and make this like take the risk, right? This is what gave them the confidence to do the projects they did. And, since then there have been more and more, but at least those first 6 were inspired and kind of catalyzed by this chance that we took here. So I think that we kind of all have a vision that comes to mind when we hear the word developer, and we've kind of talked about it, kind of hinted at it a little bit. And I think that when we talk about what they do, it's kind of muddy and vague. Like they do something with money and magic and bulldozers, and then like a project is done. But really, development is just a process, and they are just people following the steps in the process. And I guarantee that many of you are already doing some of the pieces of this process, and then you're probably giving it away to a developer so that they can take your hard work and like close the deal and keep the profit. But I digress. The next section is that we're going to talk about is kind of how to break down that process into those more consumable pieces. So again, you can understand how you are doing the process and how to pick up the pieces that you haven't tackled just yet. Okay, so before we do that, we have a question for you. We're going to have a couple of questions throughout our conversation today. So I am curious to hear from you folks, what does a developer have that you don't have? Is it money? Is it skills and degrees and special knowledge? Do you think that they know things about your community that you don't know? Is it about the market and stuff? Connections, like they know people in high places, they've got street cred, they've done they have experience with leading projects. So interested to hear what y'all think developers can do that you can't do. And so Lori, while we're waiting for folks to weigh in, maybe you can tell us what you thought developers had that you didn't have.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. Yeah, I think it was an all of the above scenario. I definitely just in my mind imagined. I remember, Kate, when you created a really neat program for some of the downtowns, a developers tour, and we were showcasing spaces and trying to build relationships and put people in the room, all the pieces of the puzzle to make a deal, a developer's deal. And I remember, yeah, it was sort of like an elusive, um, concept. And I imagine them having all of these things. I guess the connections were the one thing that I felt like I did have.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love hearing you say that you can see some of your skill sets in this list. And this is not the exhaustive list, right? We're going to talk a little bit more about what goes into development, but I do like hearing you acknowledge that you already bring some of this to the table.
So Kate, we do have a number of responses in here, and the number 1 is money. I would say no surprises there. All of the above is number 2. And then connections and access is actually number 3. So those are the 3 leaders in our poll. And I also want to highlight that Benjamin in the chat actually also mentioned risk tolerance, which is not a poll response, but I think a totally valid concern. Absolutely.
Yes, yes, and thank you, Benjamin. I'm glad that you said risk tolerance, and we are definitely going to talk about that because that is certainly one of the big ones, because it's development is a risky venture. So kind of to that point, I think, each of these things, right, could feel like a barrier if you don't have them. And for people that do have them, it's kind of like, all right, right. So you feel like kind of bolstered from this superpower energy, right? Like I've got all these things. But the truth of this is that all of these things can be learned or accessed. right? You can learn how to do it. You can do it on your own. You can build the right team, which we'll talk about later. And I don't say this to minimize how hard development is. It is really hard. And again, Benjamin, to your point, it takes a lot of risk tolerance, and you have to be brave and bold to do it. It takes a lot of time and energy and organization. But developers are not one-man bands, right? They are project managers who assume risk and build and lead teams. So this is kind of that skill set, right? Again, this is not exhaustive. I bet if we opened up a chat conversation, people would throw in some more things about things that, skill sets that developers would bring to the table. But I also bet that when you look at this list, you can check more than one box. Like Lori had that moment of awareness where she's like, yes, like I am a connector. So you probably look at this list and you're like, I can do 3 of these things, however many you can do. But there is no one person who can check all of these boxes. And I think that that is why the idea of the developer is such a myth, right? Because we can all probably think of one person in our community who is like the developer. Like, so them, they've got the name is there. They're the ones who get the credit. So we just assume that they're the ones that are getting all of these things done, but they can't, right? To be a good developer, you need the project management skills, right? So I kind of have these 3 things highlighted here. You need project management skills, you need leadership, and you probably need some of that good networking in order to like sit securely in that role. The rest of this can be made up by this killer team that you will pull together with all the people that who know how to do stuff. So these are the elements of a development project. We talked about project management skills, and when you look at a list like this, I think it becomes clear why you need to have that particular skill set, right? There are a lot of moving parts. Every project is going to move through these phases, and many of these phases can be super complex. But this is not a strictly linear process. Some of these things, like there's a lot of overlap and things move around, but there are some things that have to happen in a certain order. They have to happen before others. And again, that's the value of having somebody on your team, especially if it's somebody who's a little bit more familiar with the process than you are. They can help keep you kind of on that straight and narrow and make sure you get your timing right. I have vision and purpose highlighted here because this is literally critical. Like this is the backbone of your project. It is going to inform, it informs the why, right? It's the why you're doing the thing, but it also informs the funding that you pursue, the partners that you're going to engage, the tenants that you're going to lease to. This will be kind of your true north throughout the life cycle of the project. And when you get lost, when you get overwhelmed, you come back to this and you say, this is my touchstone. This is why I'm doing it. This is the purpose of the work. And it will help kind of lead you through. Some projects will take years. And some really complicated projects, like big, dirty brownfield sites, can take decades, not to deter anybody, but they can take a really long time. And some projects can be super short, and it really just depends on the complexity of the project. But each element here is kind of part of that package, and I think understanding them and seeing them kind of upfront will help you kind of plan a little bit better and then be prepared to build the team as you move forward through the process. So one of the things that I said kind of early on is that I actually think nonprofits are built for this work. And again, Lori, you kind of touched on it when you talked about being a connector and having these good relationships, but a nonprofit organization brings mission and values and kind of this deep community knowledge to the table. You have, spent however long kind of building these really strong, trusted relationships with residents and stakeholders, partners in the community, all of which are really critical to a successful project. And that kind of credibility is something that an outside developer would have to spend years trying to build if they ever could, right? And they usually don't. Not to be unfair to developers, but they usually don't, right? Because they're not from here, they're from the outside. So that's already kind of a strength I think that nonprofits bring. Also, nonprofits have access to non-debt funding sources that most private folks don't. So that's, your grants and donations. There are some kind of special tax credit tools that are available to nonprofits that aren't available to other folks, because they can use them as incentives. And so you might not think of yourself as well capitalized, but you actually do have more creative funding options available than you might realize. And so I think the other bonus of this too is that being the developer can strengthen your organization. So it's a way to diversify your revenue. You're building assets for your organization, and if you're thoughtful in all of your business and operational planning, it's a way to create long-term stability for your organization while advancing your mission. So it's just kind of like a big kind of cherry on top, I think, at the end. So after you've gotten kind of like all excited about like, hey, nonprofits, yes, we are natural developers. I can feel it. I'm here. Like before you get all in, I think it's really important that you do have kind of a moment of self-reflection. This is where we kind of stop and think about what it actually means to move forward with this project, right? Because you will become married to this project. It will start to kind of govern your life. And I think that this is an opportunity again for us to hear from Lori, who again kind of entered into this in kind of an unexpected fashion. And kind of learn about what her moment of self-awareness and self-reflection was. So Lori, if you could talk to us about what your experience was, kind of stepping kind of in this big shift fashion away from what the riffraff was doing or primarily focused on into this work. Like what compelled you to move forward in spite of some of those fears and concerns or kind of mismatch skill ideas that you shared earlier?
Also, Lori, if I could just add on to that, we received a chat from Irma. We are so small, no one wants to come and save us. We need to prove our worth to ourselves and create a space for people to participate. How do I start? So in your response to Kate's question, if you could also really dig into maybe like the 3 things that you did to really get started and lay that foundation to propel your momentum forward.
I think one key was just reframing how much of this process we are already doing just in our natural operations and our projects. Like Kate said earlier, looking at that list, realizing that so much of that is already in our toolkit and already in our sort of action in our community. So reframing and allowing ourselves to feel the confidence. The opportunity that was there was so clear. This collection was so remarkable, and what it could do for the community was there's such a clear vision around that. And if no one else is going to do it, it's just sort of that moment of realizing if not, them, then who? It's got to be us. And so if this were to come to pass for our community, the only way for it to happen was for us to get in the driver's seat. So there was a little bit of like stepping out in faith, I guess a lot of the stepping out in faith, and also sort of leaning into the partnerships that were built over the course of time with our city government. For us, it's 20 years of working in our community and having a level of trust that was built with the local government and foundations and our community networks. So leaning into that, I guess, sort of taking stock of your networks that are in place. I think sometimes you might not even realize how many people are in your court until you really start to take that inventory. Consider who can you lean into and who is within that person's networks as well. So the web starts to get increasingly, larger when you really take a hard look at it.
Mhm. And I'll say too, and I think I'm hoping, Irma, that we will get to kind of the heart of your question as we kind of move through some of these other pieces. But I will just plant the seed that one of the resources that you have available to you now is going to be technical assistance. There are folks like Tab. So Claire has different access to different things. If the project that you're thinking about is a good fit, there are different technical assistance pieces that can help you do what you're talking about. Like, so like bring in somebody to help you think through the process, understand where you need to start. And again, I do think we're going to touch on some of that, but I just wanted to, I guess, intentionally plant that technical assistance seed with you, because those are often free, no cost resources to help you kind of unlock what you're asking. But like I said, hopefully we get to it through this conversation. So, one of the things I think that Lori said was, that there was, she kind of indicated there's like an urgent need. And also that there was a willingness there, right? She was willing to do the thing. She's already out in the community doing stuff. She's actively engaged in the community. So there's the willingness was there. Which I think as nonprofit leaders, we kind of all have that. I don't know, maybe it's a toxic trait, but we kind of have that I will do whatever it takes mindset, because it's just kind of how we roll. And I think that is noble and appreciated. But readiness is different than willingness. Readiness is about kind of that moment of honest self-reflection, like that awareness of knowing what you are capable of taking on. And that kind of honest self-awareness moment, I think is critical, so that one, you keep your organization safe, and two, you ensure that this project, once you get it started, will actually get done. So these are actually just a few readiness assessment considerations. There are several, but these are kind of a few just to kind of kick it off, right? So project cost, is this a $600,000 project? Is it $2 million? Is it $15 million? I'm not saying that there is any number that should scare you, because I believe everything is possible. But it's something to think about, right? Like, do you have the chops to pull that off, to get access to that? Do you have the stomach for it, right? That goes back to that idea of risk. Internal capacity. Is your organization stretched too thin, right? We wear a lot of hats as nonprofits. And so the idea of taking on something like this big could be, a major deterrent, right? You'd be like, that is just too much. So strategic fit. Your project does not have to be an exact extension of your mission statement, but it does need to align with and reflect your values. So if you are an organization focused on like promoting health and wellness or whatever, you probably should not rent a space like to a vape shop or something like that, right? So it doesn't have to be an exact thing, but it has to be close. It has to be an extension of the spirit and intention of your organization. It has to be aligned with your work, in order for you to, again, continue to access dollars, those non-debt sources and things like that to make the project pencil. But if you get to the end of this list and you're like, oh, like, no way, I am not ready for this, don't stop here, right? Because this does not mean that the conversation is over, or that there's not an opportunity here. There are many paths forward for development. I think that generally we tend to think that there's like a one and done, like I'm either the developer or I'm not, but that is not the case. And actually, Lori, I wanted to hear from you. So, and it was kind of asked, I guess, by Claire, like, what did you do next? But it's like after you kind of went through some of these readiness questions, right? Like this opportunity is on the table for you. You have to decide, I either act now or something crazy is going to happen in the community, right? Like you had an urgent decision to make. In that process of readiness, what did you do next?
So we had a unique opportunity with the collection and some real estate that we had eyed as the perfect location for it, and we had a option to purchase, kind of like dibs on the property, but it had run out, and we at that point thought that the city was going to purchase it and own it. But the city realized that they did not have the risk tolerance at the time to take it on, and the next in line was a tire yard. And it was just right in the center of our museum district, right next to our railroad museum. It just wasn't the right fit. It would have been a missed opportunity. And so we kind of had to work really fast and make this decision really fast. We have a organization called the West Virginia Community Development Hub in West Virginia. And so we had a really great network of consultants and mentors, including you, Kate. And so I think one of the first things that I did was lean into your guidance and there were some resources for feasibility study, and some early pre-development kind of tools. And so I think that we started leaning into all of that to kind of shore up our thinking. And then a local foundation stepped in to help us acquire the property, and we just started making moves.
Yeah. And we had to act fast, right? That was there was a lot of urgency. And so I think some of the quiet, mindful planning that you might ease into a project was sacrificed a little bit, but we were able to kind of buddy up and just kind of hit the ground running. So I guess kind of the segue here is to say that, Lori was again like not alone in this moment, right? She had some access to technical assistance, but she also was able, she's like, I know people who know how to do things. And so she had options, and it wasn't just that she had to go it alone. And so I want to talk about what those different options look like. So it's not just the one where it's every man for himself. So before we talk about those different models, though, I do have another question for you. So what challenges do you anticipate from your board? So if you were to say to your board that you wanted to buy a historic grocery store and turn it into a museum space, what challenges do you anticipate? Are they risk averse, right? Are they like, this is scary, we don't want to do this? Maybe they are already concerned that your organization wears too many hats and there's not enough staff. Sometimes it just feels like we do health and wellness. We are not developers. This does not align with our thing. And so it's, there's an educational opportunity there. Or maybe you're thinking about it, right? Like, so for Irma, for you, like we thought about it. We know we want to lead the change. We don't know where to start. And then, somebody out there doesn't have too much to worry about because their board is like, let's do it. So while we wait for answers and responses to kind of roll in here, Lori, do you want to talk about what your board response was?
We do have a unique scenario in that we started our work about 20 years ago, and our board, before we became a nonprofit, our board members were all really involved with and cheering on and supporting our work. So by the time we brought our nonprofit board together, there was a lot of trust and support there. So I think that that's a rare and unique opportunity that we had. It certainly would not have flown if I hadn't had you, Kate, because I have vision and creativity, but the technical know-how and all of the language and knowledge surrounding this type of development was certainly not in my wheelhouse. So leaning into that relationship with you as consultant and project management was the key.
Yeah, we did. We really we tag teamed a lot of that for sure. And I think that to the point about the board, it really is it was a very special opportunity. So I see here there are a handful of other unicorns in the room, folks who have boards that are super supportive like Lori. So you are congratulations to all of you. You guys are the lucky ones. But the jury is not out for folks who kind of selected these A through E options, right? And you are clearly not alone when we see what the responses are here. And these are the same responses that I got from my board when I first proposed this project. It was definitely an uphill battle. But none of these responses should be deal breakers. They are just kind of the signals that will guide you to the right point of entry. And so that's what we're going to dig into next. I do want to kind of give the boards, though, a little bit of credibility, I guess, because they are concerns are not unwarranted. Even though development isn't something that you do alone, the rewards that come from being a developer are big because there is actual risk involved. And that risk, if you are the developer, is yours alone. And so there are two pieces that you need to know and understand fully before you jump into a project. The first is that you have to have site control. That's its own version of risk, right? That you need to own that property or have some sort of solid legal agreement in place as the developer, and nobody can do that for you, right? You have to own it. The second piece is accessing and securing capital. And you can hire grant writers, you can hire a fundraiser, you can have financial advisors, you can have somebody on your team that helps put all of that capital stack together, and you don't have to know a thing about it, but you do have to be the one responsible for the money. So if there's a loan, you're signing for it. If it's a grant, you're on the hook to accept it and manage it. Like, that risk is yours. So yes, there are kind of two roles that sit squarely with you as the developer, as the nonprofit developer, but there are options that you can explore that will kind of help reduce risk, and then in one model in particular, help you share that risk entirely. I think of development as a spectrum. There are some gray areas in how you approach projects. But there are different ways that you can show up in this development role. So the spectrum kind of represents like this range of approaches, right? Depending on your organization's capacity, your risk tolerance, to Benjamin's earlier point, and then the complexity of the project, right? So on the left, you see options that allow you to bring in heavy support, right? This is your fee developer. We'll talk about these things here in a minute. This is ideal if you are like just getting started, if you're managing kind of a more complex project. The further you move to the right, the more you're taking on yourself. So like this DIY option is great if your team has a lot of experience, you have capacity, or if the project is just kind of smaller or has like a more manageable scope. And there's no best place on the spectrum, right? It's all about finding the approach that fits kind of your organization, that fits your project, and fits kind of the goals of the community. So we will kind of dig in to each one here. So the fee developer, this is a model where you bring in an experienced developer to the project. You kind of negotiate a fee, so they get paid whatever amount, however you sort it out, and they do all of the heavy lifting, and then they're out. So it's like a contract situation. You are left with kind of this finished, leased up turnkey operation that's ready to go. Do not let the word developer confuse you here. I know we talked about a developer has to have, site control. They're responsible for money. This is just the title. In this model, you are still the person on the hook, right? You're still the owner of the asset. You're still the signer of the loan documents, the recipient of the grants. The risk is all still yours. But this person kind of literally comes in and does everything else. One of the added benefits of this model is that you still get ownership. You don't have to take on, the scary pieces of the team stuff, like the project gets done. And then because it's a contract situation, the like kind of that long-term wealth that is generated by the project still stays local. So the development consultant model is my favorite. It's my favorite because it is like it's the train the trainer, right? So this is the one where, you've got a project and you're like, I think this is going to be really great. I don't know what I'm doing. I could use some help. So a development consultant comes in and they work alongside you to do the thing. In this, it is your vision, and this person is supporting your vision. This person is supporting your leadership. They're going to advise you and kind of try to point you in the right direction, but they are there to support you through the process. They bring all those different skill sets, and maybe their big skill set is building the right team so that they can bring in all of the other skill sets, but they are going to support you through the whole thing. When something like this kicks off, it is usually like a really heavy kind of like, I always say kind of like an 80-20 split, because again, you're new to the thing, they know what they're doing, so they're going to lead the process for the most part, and you're going to kind of learn along the way. But then it starts to shift, because now you've been in this conversation for a little while. You've been learning as you go. So maybe that role starts to be more like a 70-30 or a 60-40, so it kind of shifts as you go through the project. I love this model again because it is building capacity in our communities, because when we walk away from the project with Lori in Princeton, she's going to be like, I got this. I know how to do the next project. And maybe she takes it on her own. Maybe we still do it together, maybe not. But she has learned how to do this thing. We've built a skill set in the community. There's local wealth being generated in the community, and she can pass that knowledge on to other people. I kind of jokingly say that development consultants are like the nonprofits of this universe, like we're in the business of going out of business, right? Because nonprofits, when you're doing all the things right, eventually like the problem is solved. So anyway, I think that this is a really valuable approach. People learn how to do the thing and they can pass it along to the next guy. Oh, and I guess I should also say, that is also a contract thing. So there's a fee associated with that as well. And that just kind of gets negotiated along with the terms of your project, like every other cost is going to. Co-development is another approach. This is the one, I mentioned that at least one of these would have some opportunity to share risk, and this is that. The most common co-development model is called a joint venture, and really it's just a formalized partnership. You can, as a nonprofit, you can partner with a for-profit, an individual, you can partner with another nonprofit. Whoever you want to buddy up with to get the project done, you can formalize that relationship. And a side note is if you don't want to be a developer, but there is somebody in your community that wants to be a developer and they're having a hard time getting a project to pencil, you could do a joint venture with them and be a resource and an asset to help them get the project done. So just to kind of plant that seed. But this is a really solid strategy, again, for kind of sharing the risk. It increases access to funding for both of you, right? So, now as this joint model, if there's a for-profit person involved, they have access to grant dollars that, man, if they had done this project alone, it wouldn't have penciled. Maybe they have access to funding because as a nonprofit, the banks were kind of like, I don't know if we want to, be in on this, but maybe they bring some more collateral to the table. So it's a really solid approach. And at the end of this relationship, there's an exit strategy. Somebody is going to leave the building. It's either going to be the nonprofit is going to exit at some point, or it's going to be this for-profit partner. They're going to exit at some point. Whoever's leaving is probably going to make some money in the deal as part of your arrangement. So it really can be a win-win, and it is common, right? So there's a lot of information out there, and we will actually be providing you some information about how to do this as one of our resources after this. I do want to be kind of highlight this kind of last bullet point about legal agreements. You want to be really careful, right? Because there's just a lot of work that goes into making sure that the mission of your organization isn't compromised in this relationship. And in the document that we'll share, the resource, we kind of talk about that a little more. But you want to have somebody on board in a legal capacity to help make sure that the interests of your nonprofit are protected, and that the person you're partnering with is protected as well. All right, so the DIY developer, this again is just you're going it alone. Alone doesn't mean you're the only person at the table. This just means that maybe you have like a skeleton crew. Maybe it's a smaller project. Maybe you've built up enough skill sets over time that you can really just kind of bring in the heavy hitters like your environmental folks. You can bring in your engineers, your architects, whatever. So again, you're not doing it alone, but you are taking on the majority of the responsibility, and you get the kind of the full reward, right? All these other models involve kind of like sharing those financial rewards, right? Because they're partners in the deal, or it's like another line item project cost you have to pay. When you do it on your own, you get the benefit of those rewards, but the risk is greater, for multiple reasons, right? Because you've made your team a little smaller, you don't have a partner, whatever it is. And this is the kind of fit that's best for, maybe it's a really tiny downtown project, and you have some familiarity. It's just not a super complex project, but it's definitely not the kind of thing you're probably going to do on your own, which is your first project, which is what I did, which is why I have so many, lessons learned this many years down the road. So DIY developer is an option, maybe not the best place to start from the beginning. And then this is something else that we will kind of share with you as a tool to gauge where you should be in the spectrum. And this gets into this idea of complexity. You know, we are on this call today, hosted by folks through the Technical Assistance to Brownfields program, and that is, you know, that speaks to a level of complexity, right? So already kind of out of the gate, there's probably a level of complexity that means that we should find us like support. We should have somebody come in and join us in this process. So I kind of think of it like this, like if you have a simple rehab light build out, that is probably something that you can handle in-house. Again, if you have that project management experience, not alone, you're still going to have a team, but you could DIY it. As soon as you start talking about tax credits or like a higher project cost, or even kind of like more like even like the more moderate environmental remediation, I think you're getting into this more technical territory. So having a development consultant or a co-developer who's experienced, that could be helpful. And then when you get into those large scale projects, those brownfield projects, or you know, one that is like large scale and brownfield. I mean, you're definitely in the deep end at this point, and that is where an experienced developer needs to lead the charge. If you're able to own and access or own the site and access the capital, you know, you could explore that fee developer model. Or, you know, maybe again, it's a seat at the table with kind of a joint venture. But you're definitely going to want to partner when you start getting into those larger scale, more complex projects. And again, no wrong answer. This is just a way to kind of, again, kind of help you be really honest and to kind of check in with yourself to make sure that you understand what the project needs in this moment. And it's another way to ensure that your organization is protected, that you don't get in over your head, and that the project gets done. So I wanted to, Lori, kind of check in with you again, and you kind of alluded to this already, that kind of our work in that development consultant model. But what I am curious to hear about is kind of what that experience was like for you and kind of how you feel you grew through this process.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge Elaine's question in the chat too about, starting from scratch and feeling like, how do you build a team and how do you go about, bringing in those connections if they're not already present. I think a lot of small nonprofits, like we are, and maybe some people in the room have a vision for the community and some sort of mission and goal that they're really working to build on. And in our instance, it was like the creative vision for what this, in our case, museum could be for the community, and leaning into the technical know-how. I mean, I learned the term capital stack just from we did some videos for some development projects around the region, and just sort of observing how people put together all the different financial pieces of the pie to make the broader development. It was all really, really new to me. And I had just remembered, the expertise that Kate had, and it was through this, community development network. But just the conversations and the act of being in the space with Kate as the consultant, my vocabulary expanded, my understanding of the pieces of the puzzle that get put together just built and grew over time. And I think it's been about 5 years now that we've been working on this project. And I feel like my understanding of the world of development has just expanded so much. And I do think that the next time we were to do a project, maybe I'd be a stronger partner with the consultant. But it was certainly all new to us. I think that our connections were more community based. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Yeah, well, and we will talk about building the team and as kind of we get further through this conversation. And I just want to say that, to your point, Lori, that, you kind of your involvement changed 100%, right? Like, because again, at the beginning, it was all new concepts, new tools, new whatever. And the way that our conversations are changing around tax credits, and our conversations are changing around sequencing of funding, and it's all starting to shift because you have kind of grown in that space and you've been exposed to more things and you've been involved hands-on. And so the depth of that conversation is changing. And so absolutely, you're going to be able to take that knowledge to the next person in your community and say, this is what I know. And we all get to a point, where we've reached the end of what we know, and we need to call somebody else to say, okay, teach us more. And that's the beauty of these networks, right, that we're talking about. So we all kind of help each other through. So I wanted to share a project with you guys here kind of briefly. Full transparency, I do not have a direct connection with the developers behind this project. I actually found their story online. I chatted with Claire and we talked about the value of kind of maybe highlighting a faith-based organization as a developer. And so I thought that it would be fun to share this one because this one is happening now, right? So it's unfolding kind of in real time, and I thought it would be kind of fun to share it so we can talk about it. And then, I mean, we can all just kind of follow them online. Like, I'm going to be really curious now to see how this project unfolds and kind of monitor their challenges and maybe kind of celebrate their wins along the way. So we're just going to kind of do this little case study here. This is a church in San Antonio, Texas. This is the Bethel AME Church, faith-based organization. They have, as part of their congregation, they have a service called the A.R. Nelson Christian Outreach Center. And that center has really strong community ties. They are kind of a core, like a heartstring in the community. They're known for their food pantry. They do clothing distribution, community services, things like that. They do not have a development history. Their community is facing a growing senior housing crisis, as many of our towns are. And so, similar to my experience and to Lori's experience, they were kind of like, well, I guess we're going to do this. And so they have embarked on a project that includes about 60 affordable apartments for people 62 and older. And the project is being built on an empty lot that is next to their outreach center. So this is a little bit about the folks who are stepping into the developer role, like kind of how maybe they found the strength. And it's because they kind of realized that they had some of the building blocks of a developer. Just like we go back to that skill set list, we're all seeing some of these traits in ourselves. The church board actually had some operational capacity. Obviously, they're well established in their outreach center. And so they already have kind of those connections and that trust that's built, which is critical to having community support and buy-in and getting community advocates. And then people that when they're going to go to lend, they're going to look at you and be like, we know that you are a steward and we feel like we can invest in this project. They had some internal expertise existing. The leadership of this organization is a retired public housing CEO. And so the knowledge that he brings to this project also will inspire investor confidence. So again, if you don't have specific project knowledge on your team related to the project that you want to pursue, do not fear. That is the kind of experience or that kind of knowledge that you can recruit and bring in when you build your team. But having that experience as the developer does strengthen your position when you go to access and secure funding for your project. And then finally, I mentioned that lot next to the church. They own it. So that was a clear win for them, right? The fact that they already own this vacant lot next to their outreach center means that they're going to save some time and money. They don't have to acquire the property. They probably already are very familiar with kind of the engineering pieces that are involved, the infrastructure stuff. So that ownership, that site control in place minimizes their risk and makes that opportunity kind of more realistic and more viable for the organization. So why they chose to develop, they were, as I said, kind of responding to this critical need. Members of their congregation were getting pushed out. They didn't have anywhere to live. They were really struggling to find housing. And so by choosing to lead this project, they could not only address a community crisis, but they could also keep that land kind of in service to the community long-term, kind of supporting the health and wellness of San Antonio, their little neighborhood there. It also kind of gave them an opportunity to further their mission, right? So they're strengthening the community through their values work. And when you hand something like that off to an outside developer, you risk losing control over those details, right? You can't sell somebody a piece of property and guarantee that they're going to provide something that's affordable, and that's something that's going to benefit the community. And so by stepping into that developer role, these folks were able to make sure that every decision that made serves their purpose and their people. And then also, again, as I mentioned earlier, this is an opportunity to create some income. So they will earn a developer fee associated with this project. The project will generate rental income, and then the church could take those dollars and they could set up an operating reserve for the project. They could build an endowment fund. They could use those dollars to support their future programs or ministry work. However they choose to use it, it's a revenue stream that is going to be helpful to ensuring kind of the long-term success of their project and their organization. So the development process for these groups is no different than what we've already kind of talked about. All of those elements of the project, that kind of stuff is all the same. So if that happens to be a myth coming into this, that faith-based organizations will have a tougher time, the process will look the same, but the complexity of the project might increase because there could be extra layers of governance in terms of like, are you allowed to hold debt? Are you allowed to access or utilize government funding? So there might be some differences in the way that that capital stack starts to take shape. But those challenges can be named and identified early on, and you can build the team that you need to help you navigate the issues. And that is what the folks at Bethel did. So they are working with technical assistance through a program called the Faith-Based Development Initiative. It's a crew called Enterprise Community Projects. I might have gotten that. It's Enterprise for sure, Enterprise Community. We can make sure that you have access to their website. But their faith-based initiative brings expertise kind of on the development fundamentals and legal structuring to this particular project. And then they also introduce these folks to kind of that peer network, talking again about building out networks of folks that have been faith-based developers. So they're kind of bought in now to this kind of wealth of knowledge and resource of information. I think that when we think back to that development spectrum, I would say that this particular approach is kind of somewhere between that development consultant model and DIY, probably more in that development consultant piece. But regardless, it is an excellent example of kind of strategic and thoughtful team building and the way to kind of access tools to move your project forward. So as I mentioned, this is happening now. It'll be something fun to keep track of. And when Claire and Devin follow up with everybody with these materials, we'll try to get a link to this project included there. So if you do want to kind of follow along, you know where to find them. All right, so we're going to jump in here to building the development team. This has clearly been a constant thread in the conversation, and no matter which model you choose, whether you're DIY or a fee developer, there will always be a team. So let's have another question here. Was it Irma who asked this? This might be for you. When you imagine building a team, what feels the most daunting or challenging? Is it just that you don't know who to bring in? You're like, nobody with those skill sets is in my network. We don't know how, we can't afford this. Or maybe you are like, kind of with Lori. Like Lori didn't, I don't think, and maybe I'm speaking for you too soon, but I don't feel like Lori, you were worried because you're like, I know so many people. So she felt confident that she could build a team. What was it? Who was it that had the question again about the team building?
It was Irma, and we also had another question actually from Yashika, who mentioned that they've got an aquaponics gardening project. They purchased an acre of land that was previously a residential block, and they'll be repurposing the land. They have a business plan, but no help from the government in the area. So just that other element of like, okay, so if part of your team includes the local government and maybe they're not being super receptive, how do you get them to engage? I think is another element to this conversation.
Yeah.
Just to give you a little bit of an insight into how the poll's doing. Number one, not sure who we need or when to bring them in. Number two, worried we can't afford the help. Number three, don't know anyone with the right skills. And number four, not worried at all, we'll figure it out. But the clear winner here is not sure who we need and when to bring them in.
Great. Well, so that we are definitely, the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about that for sure. I think, to this question about the support from the city, again, kind of hard to answer without additional context, but I think the biggest key is understanding what is their hesitation and hurdle. Some of those things could just be that we need to, talk about some of the different tools that are available, and understanding too, like what kind of support is it that you need specifically. So again, maybe if we get to the end, we could kind of dig into that a little bit more so that I had a little bit more context, because, certainly happy to help you brainstorm some possible solutions there. But I do think I would be better equipped if I had a little bit more context. So maybe we can dig into that towards the end, and then I'll have my contact information as well at the end, and you can always ping me after. But let's kind of dig into this a little bit. This idea about your team. So as I mentioned, if you're worried about like who you need and when you need them, we're going to talk about that next. Circling back around to this idea of like that you can't afford the help. Again, I will remind you that there are many, many programs and agencies that will provide no-cost technical assistance for a lot of the pre-development work that you're going to need before you actually commit to an idea. These are things like your market studies and feasibility studies and phase one assessments before you buy a property. There's all sorts of different pieces that like kind of your due diligence work that you want to have in place, and technical assistance can, in a lot of instances, like they can provide that. So those are no cost opportunities, and it's always better to use those no cost resources if and when you can. And then once you're committed to doing the project, you start getting into people that are a little bit harder to find funding for, like your architects and engineers. If you're going to use, these consultants, there will be fees associated with that. But those are the kinds of costs that can actually be worked into your project budget. And then as you acquire your project funding, those costs are wrapped up in that. Now, sometimes that gets into the conversation around, bridge loans and construction loans because you're waiting for the dollars to come in or whatever. All that to say, there's some complexity in how it gets structured or sequenced, but you can get those costs covered as part of your project cost. So I don't ever like to say that money isn't an issue, but I just don't like to think that money is the thing that scares you or prevents you from doing a thing, because we can probably figure something out. So like over the next few slides, again, we're going to kind of talk about who you need at each phase, and then when to kind of bring them in. So as the developer, you're bringing the vision and the concept to the table. And in the early stage, you need a team that's going to, again, help you figure out if it's viable. So you want partners that can kind of look at the opportunity from every angle. You're looking at, the building, the physical piece, the financial situation, like what's it really going to cost, do we think? And these are all ballpark in the beginning, and that's fine. Environmental, how dirty is it? What kind of problems do we have there? You might get some light legal work in the beginning, just, from that nonprofit lens. Understand the market demand. All of these things are kind of that early conversation. There's also this idea around building community support. Again, this is one piece that y'all probably all have licked. You're like, this is what we do. This is who we are. We're constantly working with the community. You probably are the community engagement specialist here. Which is great because this is going to be with you through the whole life cycle, right? It's at the beginning all the way through to the end, in some form or another. And something else I'll say too, it's not like you have, this is your team for this phase and then they all go away, and this is your team for the next phase and they all go away. Again, not a linear process, and team members they don't necessarily leave. They kind of come and go throughout the life cycle of the project as you need them. So in terms of, I think in this early stage conversation, where do we start? I think it is, kind of showing up with this idea, right? This is my vision, this is my concept, and then reaching out to see what kind of technical assistance support can I get? Is there somebody who can help me with a business, like developing a business plan for this idea? Is there someone who can help me with a market study for this idea? Just having that person at the table is going to help you kind of dig into other pieces and help you identify the other set of folks that you might want to welcome into the conversation. So I would probably start there. Obviously, if you have people in your community that you can brainstorm with and share ideas with, that's another great place to start. But if you're truly wondering, who do I call first? I would say call Claire. Reach out to Tab and see if tell her a little bit about your project and see if there's a way that she can connect you with some resources to help you take this idea just a little bit further to figure out what your next step is. Okay. In this midpoint, this is when things start to get real and really excited. You've tested your idea, you know it has legs, and you're really kind of starting to build out the plan. This is the phase when you start pooling all of your funding together. This is when you need people who kind of can dig deeper into the project cost, who understand how funding sources can work together, how financing tools can work together. This is your team that kind of gets you ready for construction. And don't forget that we are still engaging the community here. We're sharing updates, we're managing the storytelling. We are always forever and ever engaging the community. And then when you get to the end of the project, and this is very high level, right? So we're just kind of sweeping through. Remember, sometimes these are short, sometimes these are long, sometimes they're decades. But when you get to the end and you break ground, the picture of your team will shift again. And now you've kind of got these new people on the scene. These are folks who are going to help you kind of manage the build, oversee the day-to-day logistics. Your architect, even though they're not listed on this here, they're going to be there, right? They're there from beginning to end as well. They're going to help. This is the stage 2 when you start thinking about what happens after the ribbon cutting. So business planning is as critical or more critical to this than anything else, because you need to know how to operate the asset once it's up and going. If your organization plans to own and operate the building kind of long term, this is where you would engage maybe your project manager or your tenants, right? Because your tenants can be involved at this point, so they have some say in how the space is going to be designed. That's up to you and how you negotiate a relationship with your tenants. But to that point, the key is to kind of plan ahead to know roughly the type of people that you're going to have in the conversation at the end of this project, so that you can start planning for that. And if you have that right team in the early phase, they're going to help you kind of plan for all of this and get you through safely, kind of shepherd you through to the end. So Lori, in our work together, you have said many, many times that the team is what made this whole thing possible. And I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, and again, it was such a unique scenario. The woman sitting on the far right is Marcy. That's actually Lonnie's daughter, the owner of the collection, and so she was stewarding his collection as the executor of the estate. And she happens to be a designer and has a lot of urban planning background, and so the skill that was sort of at the core of the project was very creative. And there are the architects sitting across the table are from our hometown and are artists that we've worked with for a couple of decades. They painted murals in our downtown and were sort of at the table for the early parts of the Renaissance of our street. And so being able to tap them to bid on this project was such a really sweet opportunity. They went miles above and beyond what typical architects do because they were so passionate about this project. And going into the warehouse where the collection was sitting with the steam engines and the automobiles and the machines, they were like kids in a candy store. And they poured so much attention into the detail. And so I think that the opportunity here was just kind of like a uniquely creative set of people that were passionate about seeing this project happen. And I mean, we're still not over the finish line. We're still in the heart of, getting it to construction. And it's the passion and the vision of the people that make up this team that's caused us to not give up over the years.
Yeah. I will say, I guess, two things. One, that yes, the fact that they have gone above and beyond is that goes back to the value of these relationships, right? And also you find people who are connected with the work that you do. That goes to the value, I think, of having kind of that nonprofit hat in this leadership and development role. I also just want to say too that we are ready for construction. And so now we're just that's just a moment of celebration here because, as Lori said, we've been working on this for ages. It is a multi-phased project. Anyway, I just need to say that out loud that we're going to do construction any day now. So Lori, thank you for sharing that about the team. So as we've learned in the poll, and everybody has already shared, this is project funding is kind of the big scary, right? It's the one big risk factor as a developer that I think keeps most people from pursuing projects. So this is our final poll here as we kind of come to the end of our conversation. And I just want to understand from folks, when you think about how your project might get funded, what is the biggest concern? Is it about like, I don't even know where the money will come from. I don't understand where the money lives in a universe like this. Can we get funding without matching dollars or collateral? What about all these different tools or tax credits? These things that I hear about that really feel just too complicated. Like, I don't know how to use those. And what if we get a grant, but we can't spend it in time? Or again, kind of we have ideas about where the money might be, but just we don't know how to access those. And I think that these are just all really, really, I mean, these are big questions, right? They're big questions that are super overwhelming and can truly make us just not even want to take the first step. But it goes back to that idea of having the right team, right? And just knowing the people and leaning on the people that you know, leaning on the technical assistants, leaning on, the Claires and of the universe to help connect you with folks who have the skill sets that you need.
The results are rolling in. In the lead right now is can we get funding without matching dollars or collateral? Close behind is tools like tax credits or TIF seem too complicated. And we have ideas, but no clear path forward is also, I think, number three right now. So the clear winner so far is can we get funding without matching dollars or collateral?
Right. I love that question because that's a big one too, right? Especially in our rural communities where we have limited capacity. Where do we get the dollars to start the thing? So there are several different answers, I guess, to that question. One of them is sometimes if you know somebody that has, kind of a lot of familiarity with the grant universe, they have access or knowledge of, I shouldn't say access, they have knowledge of grant opportunities that maybe don't require matching funds. Lori mentioned early on that she has a local foundation in Princeton, and they were amazing. If not for that foundation, I don't know what we would have done. We would have probably, it would have been interesting, but they really stepped up in a moment to help and support. So I don't want to make it sound like it's that easy, like, money is raining down, but there are resources and there are ways to get access to capital when you don't necessarily have the matching dollars on hand. Sometimes it takes a lot of, again, a lot of networking, right? So you're making proposals to foundations about, kind of how they could support now, maybe in a contingent way. And those are things that we could talk about in greater detail. And I would be happy to have that conversation with anyone and kind of brainstorm some ideas. And we'll talk about it again too in a minute when we talk about some of the non-traditional resources that are available. But the other thing I want to kind of point out before we go into our final slides here is that it is not just about finding the money, right? It is about stacking it in the right way, which is different than when we're talking about our programming stuff. When we're writing grants for programming, it doesn't usually get that complex. When you're talking about construction, it gets that complex. So you've got to kind of stack it in the right way, the right order, make sure that the moving parts and deadlines and the rules and restrictions all work together. For example, if the timing, a lot of grants come with strict deadlines. And when you're building a capital stack for a big project, it can take ages based on where your money's coming from. And if it isn't structured in the right way, or your project hits delays, you risk losing that funding. And it happens. It happens on the best of projects. But that is why sequencing and having someone on the team who understands it, and someone who understands that you have to bake contingency funding into your project. I mean, it's so important. So again, that's just the hashtag of the day, right? Team, build the team. That's the overarching message, I think. So I am not going to spend a ton of time talking about these sources. These are traditional sources that many of you already heard of. You're familiar with these. Again, we talked about technical assistance. That one's big. Keep that in your back pocket and use it every chance you get. Grants we know about. The one thing I do want to say about grants right now is that, in kind of where we are in the world right now, a lot of these traditional sources like grants and stuff are becoming a little less reliable or predictable than they have been in the past. They will still be critical to the project, and we don't want to leave them on the table. But it's just important to be mindful that those things are shifting a little bit. And then, some of these other things that we talked about, like tools like, tax increment financing and tax credits, those can be transformative for projects. And I have seen projects that literally would not pencil but for these tools. They can be super complex. And if your project is eligible for those things, that's when we call in the cavalry. We call people that know, like they know the tricks, they know the rules, they know how to bend them, how to use them, how to get creative with them, and how to make them work. So again, team building. We try to avoid loans as much as possible, but they do come in a lot of different forms, especially for nonprofits. So don't be afraid of loans, don't be afraid of debt, but we want to kind of shop around for the best debt options when we have to. Really kind of all of these pieces can kind of work together to help you do your project. And the truth of it is most successful projects do not rely on just one of these. They blend multiple, usually way too many, into one capital stack, just because that's just kind of how it goes, right? When we're kind of working with when we're trying to work with non-debt sources, that's kind of how it goes. So there is a world of kind of less traditional funding resources, and I just wanted to highlight these for a minute. Tools like these have the potential to be transformative because they can give you that access to money that you need early on. They could also be gap fillers for projects, for project funding kind of down the road. So again, these are kind of non-traditional resources. Some of them, I think, like regulation crowdfunding, for example, is a tool that I believe has the power to change everything about the way that we build and invest in our communities, because you get to raise investment from everyday people, not just super wealthy people. Everyday people can be investors in community projects, and the power for return there is huge. For social return, for financial return, might be nominal, but it's there. It's a really powerful tool that is not used heavily, so it's still kind of, I think, making its way onto the scene, but it is a resource. And for anybody who's more interested in that, I can find some other resources to share or send your way, or you can, again, kind of give me a shout. But as we are kind of running out of time here, I don't want to dig too deep there. Downtown investment groups, that's another option that we can explore. That's a way to pull together people in your community. It's different than the regulation crowdfunding, but it's a way to pull people in your community to say, you know what? We can find the dollars to get this started. We can find the dollars to be the match for the grant. We can find the dollars to buy the building, whatever. So again, having an attorney at the table is helpful as we start to explore these kind of more creative solutions, but they build local wealth and they keep the power local. And they're really beautiful models that I don't think get utilized enough. So anyway, none of these tools are going to replace your entire capital stack. They can fill gaps, they can provide early dollars, and they have a lot of benefits beyond the financial return. I just want your eyes on them so you know that they're out there, and you can kind of independently Google or give me a holler if you want more information. So again, coming up to the end here, Lori, just real quickly, because we are so close to the final moments here, if you could share with us something that you've learned. We've talked a lot about how not all money is good money, which doesn't sound like a real thing that somebody would say, but it's true. And I thought maybe you could just share a story, a short story about when a source of money created more problems than it solved.
Right. I think that I've learned to be discerning, and that sometimes there can be more, yes, maybe strings attached to funding sources that can end up slowing the project down. I had a particular funder in the historic preservation space that we thought early on was going to be one of the keys, but it was one of the reasons that we were going in such a detailed and stringent direction with our plans, and the goalposts just kept getting moved for us. The timelines of the different ways we were putting the puzzle together just kept changing and shifting, and there didn't seem to be as much of a kind of like a grace or supportive, as supportive as we would have liked it to be. And so it ended up causing so much more time to be taken and slowing the project down in order to meet requirements that were attached to that particular funding source. So I just learned to be very discerning about the practicality of various tools within this space. And I think moving forward, I have a more grounded sort of big picture thinking of, yeah, just because there's a funding source available, it's not always the best match.
Yeah. And it's hard, right? It's hard because we're desperate for the money. We need the dollars, and the idea that you're going to leave money on the table can be really scary. But I mean, ain't nothing free. So a lot of this funding comes with strings, and you have to be really mindful of the strings, and just know when you go into it, whether or not it's worth it. So I think that's really valuable. So these are just a couple of takeaways. You don't need to do it alone to be a developer. It is all about that team. Nonprofits are uniquely positioned to lead development charge, in my opinion. There are tools, models, and partners literally for every phase. Do not count yourself out before you have explored all of these options. And mission-aligned development isn't just possible in small towns. I think it is literally critical to move them forward. So if you're all fired up after this and you're like, I'm going to be a developer, I think these are the questions that are the foundation of building that strategy. Start where you are, use what you already have, whether it's relationships, property, leadership, momentum, vision, excitement, whatever it is, build on that. And then bring in the people you know who can help you move it forward. And if you don't know anybody else, call me or call Claire or call Lori or Devin. Just call somebody. We will get you across the finish line. We are going to share some resources for you. At the end of all this, we've developed a few tools for your toolkit, and the folks at C-Clear will send this out sometime, I think, in the next week. So we will share a copy of that development spectrum for you, a developer readiness assessment to help you in those moments of honest self-awareness that are so important, and then a joint venture worksheet if that's the direction you're thinking of going. This is something that will kind of help you and whoever you decide to buddy up with kind of think through what that process looks like. And thank you all so much for hanging out with us today. So I was trying to race to the finish line there, Claire, because I know we're just like right close to the end.
Yeah.
But we are happy to answer any questions with the remaining minutes that we have.
I think we've addressed a lot of it. I have been keeping track of everything that's been put into the chat, and I will share that with you, Kate and Lori, and we can talk a little bit about if some of these these questions or these comments respond or warrant additional conversation. We'll put that in the follow-up email. So this conversation is over, not over. It's just started. We hope you continue to engage with us. When you close the webinar, there will be a quick evaluation survey. We would really appreciate it if you would fill that out. It helps us continue to deliver really impactful and valuable programming for you all. So thank you so much, Kate and Lori, for your time today and sharing your expertise. And we look forward to seeing you all, or being in your inboxes next week with these resources. I think that's a great way to continue the conversation. So have a great rest of your day, everyone, and we'll kind of close this out, and have a great rest of your week. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.